What if the people who love you the most are also the reason you feel invisible? Not because they stopped caring, not because something is broken between you, but because there is a difference between being loved and being known, and almost no one ever teaches you what that difference actually feels like. You can be surrounded by people who would drop everything for you, a partner who says goodnight every single night, a family that shows up for every holiday, friends who text you memes at midnight, and still, somewhere underneath all of it, there is a quiet ache that nobody seems to notice. This is not a summary of things you already understand about loneliness. This is a roadmap to understanding why connection and loneliness can exist in the exact same room, at the exact same time, with the exact same people. By the time this ends, you will understand something most people never figure out. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of being truly seen. And once you understand the difference, you will never look at your relationships the same way again. Think about the last time you sat in a room full of people who love you and still felt completely alone. Maybe it was a family dinner, everyone laughing, passing plates, talking over each other. And you were there too, smiling, nodding, present in body. But somewhere behind your eyes, a quiet thought was running underneath everything else. Nobody here actually knows what's going on with me. Maybe it was lying next to someone in bed, their breathing slow and steady beside you, their arm across your waist, and still your mind was somewhere else entirely, carrying a weight they didn't even know existed. This feeling has a name, even though most people never learn it. Psychologists call it relational loneliness. It is not about how many people are around you. It is about how many of those people actually understand what is happening inside you. But here's what most people never notice. You can rate your relationships as good, even great, and still score high on loneliness. Researchers have measured this for decades. Emotional closeness and physical proximity are not the same variable. You can have one without the other. This is where the real story begins. Most people assume loneliness is a math problem. Not enough people, not enough time together, not enough calls returned. So they try to solve it the same way you'd solve a shortage. Add more people, schedule more visits, join more groups, and then they do all of that, and the ache is still there. Picture someone married 11 years, 2 kids, a spouse who still opens the car door and remembers to text during a lunch break. On paper, this is exactly the kind of marriage people say they want, but most nights, after the kids are asleep, that person lies awake next to someone they love, replaying a hard conversation from work, a worry about a parent's health, a quiet dread they can't quite name. They never mention any of it. Not because their spouse wouldn't listen. They would. But somewhere over the years, handling the inner world alone became the default, and asking someone else to step into it now feels almost more awkward than staying quiet. Their spouse isn't failing them on purpose. There's simply a door that's never been knocked on, because the knocking stopped years ago. From the outside, this marriage looks solved. From the inside, 2 people are sleeping 6 inches apart and living in separate emotional rooms. Here's the uncomfortable part. If loneliness were really about quantity, adding people would fix it. But for millions of people, it doesn't. Because the real hunger was never about how many people surround you. It was about how deeply any of them actually reach you. Think of it like being hungry in a room full of food you can't digest. Technically, you are surrounded by nourishment, but if your body can't process it, you starve anyway. Relationships work the same way. You can be surrounded by love that never actually lands, because it isn't shaped the way you need it to be received. Now, here's where it gets personal. If you've ever felt this kind of lonely, there's a good chance you've also blamed yourself for it. You've told yourself you're too sensitive, too needy, too complicated to be fully understood. You've looked at people who seem effortlessly close to others and assumed something is wrong with you specifically. It isn't. minds. What's actually happening is far more common and far more explainable than you've been led to believe. Very few people realize this, but almost everyone experiences some version of this gap. The difference is that most people never talk about it, so you assume you're the only one carrying it. You're not. You are simply one of the few honest enough to notice. Think about how this shows up outside of romance and family too, because it's everywhere. Once you know what you're looking for, you can work on a team for years, laugh at the same jokes every Friday, know everyone's coffee order by heart, and still walk to your car every evening carrying something none of them know about. Coworkers can be warm, even genuinely fond of you, and still never once ask the question that would let them in. You can have a childhood best friend who has known you for 20 years, who remembers your birthday every single time, who would show up at 2 a.m. if you called, and you can still find yourself editing the truth when they ask how you're doing, saying fine, saying busy, saying the version of your life that doesn't require anyone to sit with the harder parts. This is the strange arithmetic of modern loneliness. Duration of relationship does not guarantee depth of relationship. You can know someone for 2 decades and still be relative strangers to their inner weather. Social media has made this even more disorienting. You can post a photo with 50 people liking it within an hour and still close the app feeling like nobody actually knows what today was really like for you. Attention is not the same as attunement. A notification is not a witness. Let's talk about why this happens, because the explanation will reframe everything you thought you knew about closeness. Human beings do not actually crave company. Company is easy. Company just means proximity. What human beings crave, at a level far deeper than most conversations ever reach, is attunement. Attunement is different from love. Love can exist as a feeling, quietly, without ever being expressed correctly. Attunement is the skill of translating that feeling into something the other person can actually feel, land inside them. Love is the intention. Attunement is the delivery system. This is the part almost nobody explains clearly enough. You can love someone with your whole chest and still consistently miss what they actually need from you, because loving someone and reading someone are 2 entirely separate skills. It helps to be clear about what this is not. This is not the same thing as introversion, and it is not the same thing as simply preferring smaller social circles. Plenty of people who need very little social contact still feel completely known by the few people they do let close. The ache described here isn't about how much time you spend with people. It's about whether the time you do spend actually reaches the parts of you that are waiting to be understood. You can be an introvert with one friend and feel deeply seen. You can be the most socially active person in your city and feel like a stranger to everyone in it. Some people are naturally better at reading emotional signals. They notice when your voice changes half a tone lower than usual. They notice when you go quiet in a specific way that isn't your normal quiet. They ask the follow-up question instead of accepting the surface answer. Other people, even people who deeply love you, were never taught to notice any of that. Not because they don't care, because nobody ever modeled it for them. You cannot give what was never demonstrated to you. This is where everything changes. If you grew up in a household where emotions were tolerated but never explored, you likely learned to perform being fine long before you learned how to actually process not being fine. And if the people around you now were raised the exact same way, you are essentially 2 well-intentioned people, both fluent in performing okay, neither one fluent in the language underneath it. This is not a flaw in you. This is a mismatch in emotional vocabulary, and mismatches can be corrected. Flaws cannot. There's a particular kind of quiet that lives inside this gap, and it has a texture most people never put into words. It's the specific tiredness of translating your own feelings into a smaller, more palatable version before you're willing to hand them to anyone else. You feel something large and messy, and by the time it reaches another person, it has been edited down into something manageable, something that won't inconvenience the room. And the version that finally gets spoken out loud is so far from the original feeling that even if someone responds perfectly to it, you don't feel met, because they responded to the edited version, not the real one. This editing happens so automatically that most people don't even notice they're doing it. It's It's not a decision made in the moment. It's a reflex built over years, sometimes decades, of learning which parts of you are welcome in a room and which parts are better left unsaid. Let's go deeper into why this specific kind of loneliness feels so much heavier than ordinary solitude. Being physically alone is neutral. Your brain doesn't panic over an empty room as long as you chose it. But being emotionally unseen while surrounded by people who claim to love you creates a specific kind of cognitive dissonance. Your body registers safety because people are near you, but your nervous system registers isolation because no one is actually reaching the parts of you that need reaching. This contradiction is exhausting in a way that plain solitude never is. You are not just lonely. You are lonely while performing that you aren't in front of an audience who thinks everything is fine. You were never fighting other people. You were fighting the gap between what you needed and what you were able to ask for. Let's sit with that for a moment, because it matters more than almost anything else in this audiobook. Most people who feel chronically unseen also struggle to clearly name what they need in the moment they need it. Not because they're being difficult, because somewhere along the way they learned that naming a need was risky. Maybe it got dismissed once, mocked once, ignored once too many times. So the brain adapted. It stopped voicing the need directly and started hoping someone would notice without being told. This is one of the most common invisible patterns in adult relationships, waiting to be understood without explaining yourself, because the version of you that explained clearly in the past didn't get met with understanding. It got met with confusion, or worse, indifference. But here's the mistake almost everyone makes inside that pattern. Hoping to be read correctly is not the same as being clear, and the people around you, even the ones who love you, are not mind readers. They are pattern matchers. If you never give them the pattern, they cannot match it. This isn't your fault. This is a habit built from self-protection. But habits built from self-protection can quietly become the very walls that keep out the connection you're trying to protect yourself into finding. Let's look at what this actually looks like in real relationships, because the pattern shows up in more places than you'd expect. In romantic relationships, it often looks like resentment that has no obvious trigger. You're not mad about the dishes. You're mad that you felt alone in this relationship for months, and the dishes are simply the only acceptable place to let it out. In friendships, it often looks like slowly pulling back from people you technically still like, not because anything happened, because you've quietly concluded that they'll never really get it. So why keep trying to explain? In families, it often looks like small talk that never becomes real talk. Year after year, holiday after holiday, until everyone assumes that's simply how your family communicates. Surface only, depth optional. Picture a group chat with 4 old friends who have known each other since college. It's active every day. Someone shares a funny video. Someone else replies with a laughing emoji. Plans get made for a weekend that may or may not actually happen. It looks from the outside like exactly the kind of closeness people spend their whole lives hoping to keep. But none of them have mentioned in months the things that actually kept them up at night. A layoff, a diagnosis, a marriage quietly falling apart behind a closed door. Everyone assumes someone else will bring it up first, so no one does, and the group chat stays exactly as lively and exactly as shallow as it's always been. 4 people, constant contact, and not one of them fully known by the others. In every one of these situations, the people involved usually do love each other. That was never the missing ingredient. The missing ingredient was translation. Someone has to learn how to say the real thing, and someone has to learn how to actually hear it when it's said. There is also a version of this pattern that hides inside people who look from the outside like the strong ones, the ones everyone leans on, the friend everyone calls when something goes wrong, the family member who holds everything together during a crisis, the partner who always seems to have it handled. These people often feel some of the deepest loneliness of anyone in the room because their role has quietly become the giver of support rather than the receiver of it. Everyone around them has learned to bring their problems to this person, and almost no one has learned to ask this person what they might be carrying themselves. Over time, being needed starts to feel like a substitute substitute for being known, and the two are not the same thing at all. If this describes you, there's a good chance you've never actually tested whether the people around you could hold your weight too, because you've spent so long proving you could hold theirs. The evidence you're missing is not proof that they can't. It's simply proof that you've never given the experiment a real chance to run. There's a quiet fear underneath this pattern that deserves to be said plainly. If you stop being the strong one, even for a moment, some part of you worries the people who depend on you will simply disappear, that the role is the only thing keeping you valuable in the relationship. This fear rarely gets tested either, because testing it feels too risky. But roles built entirely on usefulness are fragile in a different way than roles built on being known. Usefulness can be replaced. Being known cannot. The safest long-term position is not the most needed one. It's the most understood one. Now here's the psychological explanation tying all of this together. Attachment researchers have spent decades studying why some people feel securely connected even during conflict, while others feel disconnected even during affection. The difference usually traces back to early emotional environments, not just whether you were loved as a child, but whether your internal emotional world was accurately reflected back to you. A child who cries and is met with, "I see that you're upset, tell me what happened," learns that their inner world is legible to other people. A child who cries and is met with, "Stop crying, there's nothing to cry about," learns something very different. They learn that their inner world is inconvenient, confusing, or invisible to others. This isn't usually a story of cruelty. Most parents who respond this way are not trying to teach disconnection. They are simply repeating the exact response they received from their own parents, who received it from theirs. Nobody sat down and decided to raise emotionally invisible children. It happened the way most inherited patterns happen, quietly, automatically, passed down by people who never had the chance to learn a different script themselves. Understanding this doesn't erase the impact. It just removes the need for blame, which frees up energy for something more useful than resentment. Once you see the pattern as inherited rather than personal, it becomes something you can interrupt instead of something you have to carry as evidence against yourself or against the people who raised you. That second child often grows into an adult who is deeply capable of loving others, but who unconsciously expects not to be understood in return. So they stop advertising their inner world clearly, not out of coldness, out of quiet, learned resignation. This explains why some people can be in loving relationships and still feel like the only witness to their own emotional life. Attachment researchers usually describe three broad patterns that grow out of these early environments. People with a secure pattern tend to believe their inner world is both legible and welcome, so they voice needs plainly and expect a reasonable response. People with an anxious pattern tend to believe their inner world is legible but overwhelming to others, so they voice needs loudly, sometimes in ways that push people away without meaning to. People with an avoidant pattern tend to believe their inner world is simply not worth voicing at all, so they stop bringing it to anyone, including the people who would genuinely want to hold it. None of these patterns are life sentences. They are starting points built in childhood, still operating quietly in adulthood, mostly outside of conscious awareness. But because they were learned, they can also be relearned. The nervous system that adapted to an unresponsive environment is capable of adapting again to a responsive one, given enough repeated evidence. This matters because it means the loneliness you feel now is not a fixed trait of who you are. It is a prediction your nervous system is making based on old evidence, and predictions update when new evidence keeps showing up. Think of your nervous system as running a background model, constantly forecasting how safe it is to reveal something real. That model was trained on the earliest data available to it, usually collected before you were even old enough to question it. If the early data said revealing yourself leads to being dismissed, the model keeps predicting dismissal even decades later, even in relationships where the actual evidence has quietly changed. This is why you can be with someone genuinely safe and still brace for a rejection that isn't coming. The model hasn't caught up to the new environment yet. Updating that model doesn't happen through insight alone. Understanding why you brace for rejection connection doesn't automatically stop the bracing. It happens through repetition, through choosing to reveal something real and watching, again and again, what actually happens when you do. Each time the feared outcome doesn't occur, the model adjusts slightly. This is slow, unglamorous work, and it rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. But it is exactly how people move from a lifetime of predicting disconnection to a lived experience of being reliably known. Now here's the unexpected insight, the one that reframes everything. The goal was never to find someone who can read your mind. The goal is to become someone who can clearly translate your own inner world, so that the people who already love you finally have something to work with. You've likely spent years hoping the right person would simply understand you without effort. But understanding without effort is a myth built by movies, not a feature of real relationships. Every deep connection you've ever witnessed, the ones that look effortless from the outside, were built through repeated, deliberate translation. Someone said the real thing. Someone else learned how to receive it, over and over, until it became fluent. This means the ache you've been carrying is not proof that you're too much, or too complicated, or unlovable in some permanent way. It is proof that you have not yet had enough practice or enough safety to translate your inner world out loud, consistently, to people who are capable of learning your language if you teach it to them. There is a strange comfort in staying quiet, one worth naming honestly. As long as you never fully explain yourself, you never have to risk the specific disappointment of being fully explained and still not fully understood. Silence protects you from a particular kind of pain, but it protects you from connection just as effectively as it protects you from rejection. You cannot selectively numb one without dulling the other. The same wall that keeps out disappointment keeps out the very closeness you're aching for. This is the trade almost nobody names out loud. Every year you spend protecting yourself from the risk of being misunderstood is also a year spent making sure you're never fully understood either. At some point, the math stops making sense. The protection cost more than the risk it was guarding against. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice, because insight without application evaporates within a day. The first shift is learning to name the feeling before the behavior. Instead of going quiet and hoping someone notices something is wrong, you say the sentence you've been avoiding. Something happened today and I've been sitting with it alone. Can I talk it through with you? That single sentence does more relational work than months of silent hoping. The second shift is separating the fear of being a burden from the actual likelihood of being one. Most people who feel chronically unseen also carry a quiet belief that their needs are too heavy for other people to hold, but needs stated clearly in a normal voice without apology rarely feel like a burden to someone who actually cares. What feels like a burden is guessing games, tension with no explanation, and resentment that shows up sideways instead of directly. The third shift is giving people a real chance to meet you before deciding they can't. This means saying the specific thing, not the vague thing. Not, "You never get me," but, "When I mentioned I had a hard day and you changed the subject, I felt unseen, and I'd love it if you asked one more question next time." Specificity gives people something to actually improve. Vagueness only gives them something to defend against. The fourth shift is recognizing the difference between someone who cannot attune to you and someone who simply hasn't been shown how yet. Some relationships genuinely lack the emotional capacity you need, and that's real, and it matters, and no amount of clear communication will manufacture capacity that isn't there. But many relationships are simply untrained, not incapable, and untrained can be taught. Incapable usually reveals itself only after you've given someone a real, clear chance. The fifth shift is learning to tolerate the discomfort of being witnessed while you're still figuring something out. Many people wait until a feeling is fully processed and neatly explained before sharing it, which means by the time they speak, the moment for real connection has already passed. Real intimacy often happens in the messy middle, not the tidy conclusion. Saying, "I don't fully understand this yet, but I don't want to sit with it alone," invites someone into the process instead of only the summary. The sixth shift is noticing your own reaction when someone actually does try to reach get you. Some people, after years of feeling unseen, have quietly trained themselves to deflect care when it finally arrives. A joke to diffuse a tender moment. A quick subject change when someone asks a real question. If you recognize this in yourself, it doesn't mean you don't want connection. It means part of you learned that connection was unreliable, so it built a reflex to protect against the disappointment of reaching for it and coming up empty. That reflex can be noticed and slowly, gently, unlearned. This is the part that requires the most honesty from you. You have to actually give people the clear version of you before deciding they failed to understand the vague version. Let's go back to that family dinner, that quiet room beside someone sleeping, that friend group full of laughter with no depth underneath it. The people closest to you probably are not failing to love you. They are likely working with an incomplete map, one where you left out the coordinates that mattered most, either because no one taught you to include them, or because somewhere along the way, sharing those coordinates felt too dangerous to risk again. The people who seem emotionally strong to you are not different from you in the amount of pain they carry. They simply practice a different habit. They say the real sentence instead of hoping someone infers it. And practice, more than personality, is what separates people who feel consistently understood from people who feel quietly invisible. Here is where the deeper identity shift happens. For a long time, you may have organized your identity around being the person who copes quietly, who doesn't make things difficult, who manages their own emotional weather without asking anyone else to step into the storm with them. This identity felt safe. It protected you from the risk of being dismissed, but it also guaranteed the very isolation you were trying to avoid. The transformation is not becoming someone who needs less. It's becoming someone who communicates more clearly, so that the love already surrounding you can finally reach the places it was always meant to reach. This is uncomfortable to hear because it means the ache was never fully someone else's fault, and it was never fully your own either. It lived in the space between two people who never learned how to translate for each other, and that space is not permanent. It is simply unpracticed. There's one more piece of this identity shift worth naming clearly, because it changes how you'll carry this forward. Somewhere along the way, many people quietly decide that needing to be understood is itself a weakness, something to grow out of, something more evolved people supposedly don't require. This is a myth, and it's a costly one. Needing to be known is not immaturity. It is one of the most consistent, well-documented human needs there is, present in every culture, every age group, every era of recorded history. The goal was never to need this less. The goal was to get better at asking for it clearly from people capable of giving it. Once you stop treating the need itself as the problem, you free up all the energy you were spending on hiding it, and you can finally spend that energy on communicating it instead. There's a final distinction worth making because it will save you from a discouraging misunderstanding later. Practicing these shifts will not instantly transform every relationship in your life into deep, effortless closeness. Some people, when given the clear version of you, will rise to meet it. Others, even people you love very much, may not have the capacity right now or ever to hold what you're offering. That second outcome is painful, but it's also information. It tells you where to invest deeper energy and where to grieve a limitation rather than keep waiting for a change that isn't coming. The point was never to guarantee that everyone understands you. The point was to stop guaranteeing that no one can, which is exactly what silence does. Clarity doesn't promise a perfect outcome. It simply gives connection an actual chance to happen, instead of leaving it to guesswork that was never going to succeed in the first place. Let's slow down for the ending, because this truth deserves room to settle. You are not lonely because you're unlovable. You are not lonely because the people around you don't care. You are lonely because somewhere along the way you learn to hide the specific, honest, sometimes inconvenient truth of your inner world, and the people around you never received the map that would have let them find you. That map can be redrawn, not overnight, and not without some discomfort, but every time you say the real sentence instead of the safe one, you hand someone another coordinate, and slowly, the people who already love you start finding their way to the parts of you that have been waiting quietly to finally be seen. Loneliness in the presence silence of love is not a contradiction. It is a signal. It tells you exactly where the translation broke down and exactly where the next honest conversation needs to begin. Somewhere tonight, someone who loves you is going to ask how your day was. You will have a choice, the same choice you've had 1,000 times before. The easy answer, the one that keeps the room comfortable, or the true one, the one that finally gives them something real to hold. You don't have to give the whole truth all at once. You don't have to turn one conversation into years of unspoken weight. You only have to give slightly more than you gave yesterday, a little more accuracy, a little more honesty about what's actually happening underneath the fine. That's how every deeply known relationship you've ever admired was actually built, not in one dramatic breakthrough conversation, but in hundreds of small moments where someone chose the true answer over the easy one, and someone else learned, slowly, how to receive it well. It will feel awkward at first. Almost every meaningful change in how people relate to each other feels awkward before it feels natural. The first time you say the real sentence instead of the easy one, it might come out clumsy, too blunt, or not quite right. That's fine. Fluency in any language starts with clumsy sentences. Nobody translates their inner world perfectly on the first attempt, and nobody needs to. What matters is that you keep choosing the true answer often enough that it eventually stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like simply how you speak. You were never as alone as you felt. You were simply speaking a language no one had been taught to hear yet, and now you know exactly where to start teaching it.